Good day, class. In today's lecture, we are going to take a look at public policy and public finance. As part of this lecture, we are going to examine government expenditure as well as government's revenue. And we're also going to take a look at the tax system, in particular, the tax system used by Trinidad and Tobago. So the objectives of today's lecture is to examine the macroeconomic objectives of the government, the source of government revenue, the source of government expenditure, the purpose of taxation, the types of taxes, as well as the principles of taxation. Now let me ask the question, what is the public sector? We in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a public sector. What do we mean by the public sector? The public sector is a part of the economy that is regulated and governed by the government. So the part of the economy for which the government has direct control and responsibility is known as the public sector. Now, why is it important for us to have a public sector? First reason is first to promote competition. So in order for there to be competition, we have a public sector so that goods and services are not only provided by the private sector or businessmen whose main aim is to maximize profits, but by the government whose aim is to look after the well-being of the citizens. We also have a public sector to ensure the provision of goods and services that are not provided by the private sector. So the private sector does not provide all goods and necessary goods and services. So the public sector would provide these goods and services that are not provided by the private sector. We also have a public sector to tackle externalities, and externalities are positive and negative effects of an event in an economy. So, for example, a negative externality would be that of pollution. Whether it's noise pollution or air pollution, it has a negative impact on the citizens. The public sector is also important to enforce contracts. So in order to ensure rules and regulations, laws, whether it's business laws, different laws within the economy to protect the citizens, and that is governed and controlled by the public sector. It's also important to have a public sector to redistribute income and wealth, and income and wealth is redistributed via taxes. So when it is everybody has to pay income tax, that is a way in which the government is able to redistribute income and wealth to ensure that those who are not able to afford will be able to afford some basic necessities. And the final role of importance of having a public sector is to promote macroeconomic objectives. And when I talk about macroeconomic objectives, we would have examined some of those, which would include economic growth, to promote economic development, to lower inflation as well as unemployment in a society or in an economy. And we would have already spoken about economic growth and development. Economic growth measures the productive capacity of a country, while economic development is a process by which a country is able to increase its per capita, GDP per capita, as well as the social and infrastructural development in that country. Inflation, we know, is the increase in the overall price level, whereas unemployment is a number of people who are actively looking for a job but unable to find one. So the government or the public sector is responsible for some of these macroeconomic objectives. Now on to slide 10. Where does the government get its revenue from? There are many different sources of government revenue. One of the main sources of a government revenue is that of income tax. Another source is that of social security contribution, corporation tax, value added tax, excise duties, which is tax on imported goods, council tax, business rate, which is the tax that businesses pay, other taxes, other sources of financing, borrowing, grants. All of these are examples of sources of government revenue. So this is where the government finances come from. When government receives this revenue, what do they spend it on? So we move on to slide 11, which examines government expenditure. And government expenditure is spent on defense, which is law and order, education, health and personal social services, housing, heritage and the environment, law and order, social security, the different industries, transport, other spending, as well as debt interest. So if we were to think about Trinidad and Tobago, all government expenditure, I'm sure you can come up with a number of avenues through which the government would spend. For example, GATE, which is on education, the hospitals, the public servants, the infrastructure, which is the highways. So all of these are examples of government expenditure. Now, whenever government expenditure exceeds government revenue, we have what is called a budget deficit, a deficit or a government deficit. And whenever our revenue exceeds our expenditure, then we have what is called a surplus, right? So A government budget balance is the amount of money that the public sector has to borrow during a given financial year, and it is called the government budget deficit. So the deficit is what they have to borrow in order to meet their expenditure. And when it is revenue is greater than expenditure, then we have a surplus in the economy. Now we are going to move in and examine in detail taxes. What do we mean by the term taxes, the types of taxes, the types of tax systems, as well as the principles of taxation. Now, what are taxes? Taxes are compulsory transfers of money or compulsory payment made by individuals, groups, or institutions to the government. So taxes are compulsory. The government does not ask us if we want to pay taxes, but they are compulsory. Now, there are two types of taxes. We have direct taxes and then we have indirect taxes. But just before we examine direct and indirect taxes, we're going to look at the purpose why taxes are levied. And one of the purposes for levying taxes on citizens is to finance public expenditure. So taxes are levied to finance public expenditure, to pay for all the expenditure of the government. The expenses that we spoke about, taxes are levied to pay for public expenditure. Taxes are also levied for distributive purposes, to ensure that those who are not able to afford in society, that they are able to meet certain basic necessities. For allocative purposes, to ensure that we allocate resources within the different sector, and also to meet the macroeconomic objectives of the country. And we spoke about some of these macroeconomic objectives, in particular economic growth, development, in controlling inflation, and reducing unemployment. Now, there are two types of taxes. We are on slide 15, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Now, direct taxes are taxes that are levied on income, wealth, and spending power, or any combination of these three tax bases. So any tax that is levied on income, wealth, and spending power is called a direct tax. So, for example, income tax is an example of a direct tax, and the taxpayer comes into direct contact with the tax collector. So, direct taxes are taxes levied on income, wealth, and spending power. On the other hand, we have indirect taxes, and indirect taxes are taxes levied on goods and services. So, for example, value-added tax is an example of an indirect tax, or excise duties, which is taxes levied on imports. These are examples of indirect taxes. So, any tax that is levied on goods and services, this is known as a indirect tax. Now, the taxpayer does not come into direct contact with the tax collector in the case of an indirect tax. So there are two types of taxes, direct tax and indirect taxes. We are moving on to slide 16, where we are going to examine the types of tax systems. Now, there are three types of tax system: the proportional tax system, progressive tax system, and regressive tax system. On slide 17, we are going to take a look at proportional tax system. The proportional tax system is a tax system for which, as income increase, the percentage of your income that you pay in taxes remains constant or remains the same. As income increase, the percentage of your income that you pay in taxes remains the same. So, for example, if I'm making $5,000 a month, or let's say $8,000 a month, and I'm paying 25% taxes, when it is my salary increased to $20,000, I'm still paying 25% in taxes. So the percentage of my income that I pay in taxes remain the same. That is known as a proportional tax system. Now, Trinidad and Tobago has a proportional tax system. Everybody is given a $6,000 exemption, and anything that you make after that $6,000, you are taxed 25%. Recently, the government indicated that anybody who's making more than $1 million will be charged 30%, but this hasn't come into effect as yet. But at present, we have a proportional tax system. Then we move on to examine a progressive tax system. A progressive tax system is a tax system in which, as income increase, the percentage of your income that you pay in taxes would also increase. So as income increase with this type of tax, as income increase, the percentage of income paid in taxes would also increase. So this means if you're making $8,000 and you're paying 25% taxes, when you're making $10,000, you may pay a higher percentage in tax. If you're making $20,000, you may also pay a higher percentage in tax. So as income increase, the percentage percentage of your income that you pay in taxes would also increase. This is known as a progressive tax system. And the final type of tax system is what is called a regressive tax system. And a regressive tax system is a tax system in which, as income increase, the percentage of income that is paid in taxes would decrease. And an example of this type of tax in the UK is excise duties on vehicles. This is a form of regressive tax. So as the value of the vehicle increase, the percentage of the tax you would pay on that vehicle would also decrease, and this is known as a regressive tax system. So there are three types of tax system: a proportional tax system, in which we have in Trinidad and Tobago, a progressive tax system, and a regressive tax system. Now we are going to move on to examine the principles or the canons of taxation. And some of the principles of taxation or the canons of taxation is the benefit principle, the ability to pay principle. Taxes should be clear and certain to the taxpayer and tax collector. The manner and method of collecting taxes should be efficient and convenient, and the cost of collecting taxes should be to its minimal. So these are just some principles of taxation. I'm going to explain the benefit principle and the ability to pay principle in a little bit, but let's look at the other three principles. Taxes should be clear and certain to the taxpayer and tax collector. This means that you as a taxpayer, you should know the amount of taxes that you have to pay, and it should be clear and certain to both you and the tax collector. Also, the method, manner, and time of payment should be convenient, and that is why taxes are paid every month. So if you're monthly paid, you pay taxes when you get paid, and also the tax is taken before you get your income, your net tax is already removed. So citizens don't have to go and pay the tax, but it's already removed. So it makes the method, manner, and it makes it efficient and convenient. And the cost of collecting taxes should be at its minimal. Tax collection there should be a minimal cost in tax collection. And in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a minimum cost because your employer is responsible for deducting the taxes from you. Right, now we are going to go on to examine the other two principles or canons of taxation on to slide 22, where we are going to examine the benefit principle. And the benefit principle states that the taxes that people pay should be related to the benefits that they derive from public spending. So based on the amount of taxes you pay, you should be able to derive benefits through public spending. And these are benefits from the government, right? So in Trinidad and Tobago, people pay taxes and you're able to get free healthcare, you're able to get free education. So that is tied into the benefit principle, that the taxes people pay, they should be able to get related benefits through public spending. Right? So this is what the benefit principle is saying. Now, the application of the benefit taxation states that both sides, both the expenditure and taxation side of the government budget, be determined at the same time. So when we are applying the benefit principle, the expenditure by government as well as the taxation, that should be determined at the same time. Benefit principle, we should benefit from the taxes that we pay via public spending. And then we have the ability to pay principle, which is on slide 23. And this is saying that people should be taxed based on their ability to pay. Taxes are usually viewed as a burden to taxpayers. And this principle states that tax revenue should be raised in such a way that the tax burden is distributed among individuals according to their taxable capacity or their ability to pay. So you should pay taxes based on your ability to pay. So in Trinidad and Tobago, the government has deemed that as long as you're making $6,000 or less, you do not have the ability to pay taxes. However, if you're making above $6,000 a month, then you have the ability to pay taxes. So the principle focus on how much taxes people are able to pay instead of the benefits they derive from that tax. So people should pay taxes based on their ability to pay these taxes. On slide 24, we are going to examine the difference between horizontal and vertical equity in the tax system. And horizontal equity is just saying that it implies equal treatment for tax purposes for people of equivalent circumstances. So if we have two individuals, each of them receiving the same income, then in terms of taxes, they should be treated equally or fairly across the board. So people with same income, wealth, and circumstances should pay the same amount of taxes as the ability to pay taxes, based on the ability to pay these taxes. So that's horizontal equity. We are on the same level, we have the same income, same wealth, same circumstance, then we should be paying the same taxes. On the other hand, vertical equity, this implies unequal treatment of unequal circumstances. So if you're making more money than me, then you should be charged a different tax bracket than I am being charged. So vertical equity says that this is where individuals with unequal circumstances in terms of their income wealth should pay different taxes based on their circumstances. So somebody who has a lot more money and wealth should pay a higher tax than somebody who does not have as much wealth and as much income. So that is the difference that's vertical equity. So unequal circumstances, unequal taxes, whereas horizontal equity is saying equal circumstances, equal taxes. And then when we have what is on slide 25, we have some characteristics of a modern tax system. And some of these characteristics include we should be able to accurately estimate the yield of individual taxes. So when paying taxes, the government should be able to accurately estimate how much taxes each individual is supposed to pay. There's also supposed to be equitable distribution, and we just spoke about equity, horizontal and vertical. Same circumstances, we pay same taxes. Unequal circumstances, we pay different taxes. And then taxes should not discriminate between income groups. So taxes should not discriminate. And also last, taxes should have a built-in flexibility and automatic adjustment. What does that mean? It means that the tax system should be in such a way that it goes hand in hand with when the individual is paid. So if you paid monthly, then you pay taxes monthly. If you paid quarterly, then you pay taxes quarterly. And these taxes are usually removed before you get paid. So that is what we mean when we say it should have a built-in flexibility or automatic adjustment. So some of the characteristics of a modern tax system is that you should be able to accurately determine the tax yield of each individual, which is the amount each individual is supposed to pay in taxes. It should have an equitable distribution of taxes. Taxes should not discriminate between income groups, and it should have a built-in flexibility and automatic adjustment. What have you learned so far? So far we know that taxes are compulsory payments made by individuals, groups, and institutions to the government. We have two types of taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes. And we have three types of tax systems, which is the proportional, progressive, and regressive taxes. And we also have some canons of principles of taxation, the benefit principle, and also the ability to pay principle. I'm hoping that this lecture would have enlightened you on taxes in Trinidad and Tobago. Remember, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a proportional tax system, which is as income increases, the percentage of your income you pay in taxes, it remains the same. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we pay 25% in taxes. Although recently, in the new budget, people who are going to earn more than $1 million are going to have to pay 30% in taxes. But we have a proportional tax system. If you have any questions or queries, do not hesitate to let me know. Post me, send me an email, post a question on the eClassroom. And I want to wish you a blessed week, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Bye.